1997 general election, a significant number of seats went to the Labour Party under Tony Blair's leadership. So it was very crucial for Tony Blair to get those seats to achieve a majority. And I think Keir Starmer will be hoping to achieve the same thing.
The leadership contest that is presumably going to be quite bitter now after Humza Yousaf resigned as Scotland's First Minister. And this could be something that Keir Starmer's sitting back and looking and thinking, aha, that gives me just that little bit more space. It's going to be a fairly bruising, having already had a fairly bruising 13 months or so, leadership battle for the SNP. Let's look at the implications. Martina Bet, political correspondent at The Sun, is here. Martina, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie.
I mean, he didn't have the job for long, and it was an extremely tricky time.
Absolutely. I think he had the job for just about 13 months when he was sworn in as Scotland's sixth First Minister. And I think it's worth remembering that obviously the investigation into the SNP's finances was ongoing before he took over as leader of the SNP. But it was only a week later, I think, just over a week later, that the police search related to the investigation took place at Nicola Sturgeon's home and the SNP headquarters. So it didn't really have long before this sort of chaos started descending upon him. So 13 months, just over 13 months.
So some of it actually was kind of baked into the party that he then took leadership of. Some of it maybe was about the decisions that he made, maybe being a little bit politically unwise at times. Who would want the job now?
Yeah, well, last night we saw nationalist grandees rallying around John Swinney, who served as Scottish Deputy First Minister for 8 years. And he said he was giving active consideration to running. He received, I think, the backing of a rising star SNP figure, Stephen Flynn, who obviously is the SNP Westminster leader. And he actually had been urged to run by some supporters. Then we've got former Finance Minister Kate Forbes, who was narrowly defeated by Yousaf last year. And apparently she's also considering a second tilt at the job last night. But I mean, there could still be an election within 28 days if the SNP struggle to prove that they can form a majority of the Scottish Parliament. So it's still to see.
Yeah, and the wider picture, if we look towards a UK general election, is to what extent this sort of boosts or bolsters, at least, the Labour Party in Scotland.
Well, of course, Labour believes it could be quite a significant boost. And I think there was this article in the Times today that says that polling by YouGov found that Labour was now a point ahead of the SNP in Scotland on 34%. This would bring an end to the nearly 20 years of SNP dominance in Scotland. And I think another thing is worth remembering is that in the 1997 general election, a significant number of seats went to the Labour Party under Tony Blair's leadership. So it was very crucial for Tony Blair to get those seats to achieve a majority. And I think Keir Starmer will be hoping to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, it would bring wouldn't it, an end to dominance that the SNP have had in Scotland.
Absolutely. 20 years, we've seen Nicola Sturgeon over this time being pretty much, people, even I think it was just a month before she resigned, people could not really foresee that the chaos that was about to happen.
So. Chaos is definitely the right word. We'll be looking at this in a bit more detail a little bit later. I think turning our attention now to the UK government's issues with immigration, illegal immigration particularly. Now, there's a real problem here for the Home Office because they were sort of forced to admit, if you could tell us what happened, Martina, that the migrants that were supposed to be destined on these first flights to Rwanda, in truth, the Home Office can't locate all of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I guess. But yeah, this document that quietly slipped out by the department says there are 5,700 migrants that have been identified for removal, but only 2,145 continue to report to the Home Office and can be located. But the others, the Home Office say they have not necessarily absconded, but they're not subject to reporting restrictions, which means that they cannot be located for detention, and it means that they're not in contact with their Home Office. And I think sources in the department have said that the reason why they're not in touch with the Home Office is because they're scared that they might be deported to Rwanda. this is not a great situation for the Home Office to be in. And I think there was a comment that I just looked up by someone underneath the Times article that said, "I cannot believe there is a flaw in this perfectly formed plan," which I think kind of sums it up. But the other thing that I thought was interesting in the article is that the document also revealed concerns that MPs could succeed in delaying or cancelling the deportation of migrants by submitting last-minute representations, which is not, I think, something that I'd heard before. But apparently it's a long-standing parliamentary convention that removal is suspended until a case has been considered and a response issued to the MP. Obviously, the department says it has all the stuff necessary to respond to these MPs' representations, but we'll have to see, I guess.
I mean, you just kind of head in hands at how complex and how difficult it has been to engineer this. I think the Times is saying this morning, sources in the department, this is at the Home Office, accepted there was a significant risk that these people would abscond following the implementation of the veranda scheme. It's clearly going to be a significant headache. And Martina, we've just had a text. I mean, Nicholas is being a bit wry saying this, but he said those migrants who are supposed to be on the veranda flights can now presumably or probably be found in Ireland. I mean, this is a sort of side effect that we hadn't anticipated of the policy. Just tell us the latest, because the Prime Minister's saying, well, if these asylum seekers have gone to Ireland, we certainly won't be taking them back.
Absolutely. And it's kind of a funny story because, in a way, it proves the point that the Prime Minister and lots of other government ministers are making, that Rwanda is proving to be a deterrent because migrants are leaving and crossing the border with Northern Ireland to go into Ireland. And I mean, the Irish Deputy Prime Minister said that this is because the reason why there's been a surge of migrants coming from the UK is because they fear of being sent to Rwanda. And Irish ministers are now preparing emergency laws to override a recent Irish court ruling that banned returns to the UK. But I mean, we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday, and he said, we're not interested in accepting people back from Ireland. And this is because the EU doesn't accept returns back to France, where illegal migrants are coming from. So he said, of course, we're not going to do that. So what happens now is unclear. But I'm sure we'll see more of that and more of a bit of a row with our Irish friends and perhaps the EU.
And they'll have more meetings today, I believe. Martina, thank you so much. Martina Bet, political correspondent at The Sun, going through those stories with me, whether that is who is going to take the helm of the SNP, how challenging a job that would be now. I mean, imagine the job that you'd inherit now compared to the one that Hamza Yousaf did 13 months ago. A very different landscape and such a torturous, difficult time for the leadership of the SNP, for the membership of the party, for the pursuit of Scottish independence. Andrew Neil said this morning, the fall of Hamza useless means independence is dead for a generation. The only legacy of the SNP is decline and decay.